Hey, so now that we have our positioning system built, I've copy pasted it into the main FLA file. That will be our website, and the width is 980, height is 600, frames per second is 30. And now we can start building our navigation system first, and we'll position it with this code when we're finished. First of all, let's check out quickly how our navigation should look, so we know what to do, right? We want to achieve this. We'll add our buttons to the stage dynamically, so we'll create a movie clip and export it for ActionScript. Then we'll just add it with a for loop and store the names to our buttons in the array. When all of that is done, we'll just reposition the Nav Container and scale the Nav Container so we don't have to work with each button separately and even the nav side separately. This will make our lives a bit easier and also make it easier on the player to render this whole website. Cool, so let's start. First of all, we'll do the container thing. So nav container sprite equals new sprite add child nav container. This is just a containing movie clip, a containing sprite actually, that'll hold all of our buttons, and we'll add all of our buttons as children to this nav container, and that's also why we've created it first. Secondly, we need the nav array. This will hold the names to our buttons, right? So who are we? Then we have featured work. Then we have our vision. Then we have contact us, and our vision is actually news. So news. That's the array, right? And we should just data type it array. Okay. And the next thing is the for loop. So we need a loop that'll loop through all of these, create our buttons, space them correctly, and give them appropriate names. And let's do that. For var I number equals 0, I is less than 4, and I plus plus. So we're incrementing it by 1. And we're adding all of our nav items. And here's the nav item, okay? So this is the really basic movie clip. If we double click in here, you'll see that we have and we can even break this apart if we want to. Really don't need it to be anything more than a shape, right? So this is a basic shape, this is another basic shape, and then we have this text in here which will use some actions later to fix the whole positioning problem, so we don't see text actually spilling out of our dynamic text. Okay, so we have a simple navigation item movie clip, and now we'll add it. So var nav item, and it's the class nav item equals new nav item add child nav container actually nav item. So this will add 4 buttons to the stage, but it won't position them and it won't give them names. So if we do that, you know, they're all in the same position and still it's nav item, which we don't want. So in between here, we have to say nav item, so we have to specify the x positioning of our objects, of our navigation buttons, and say nav item dot width, like so, times I. Okay, this will position them on the x-axis and space them exactly for their own width, which is what we want. Secondly, we'll give the dynamic text inside of our nav item different values. So you can see that we can access it through nav name. Its instance name is nav underscore name, so this is how we'll access it. from our navigation actions. So this is nav item and nav name dot text equals nav array I. This will take, for each loop, this will take a different value out of the array. First time it'll be who are we, second time it'll be featured work, and so on. Okay? And then we can have it added over here. So this is quite a simple loop, but a functional one nonetheless. So if you run that, we already see the buttons being spaced, and this whole thing is working okay. One more thing we need on the right, and that's the little gray box, right? The name, because I've imported that into our library already, is nav side. Again, this is just a really basic shape. I mean, you know, a square, nothing else. And it's a movie clip that's exported as nav side. And this could also hold some of our controls for sounds or some kind of info button or whatever you want. And this is how we'll add it. So var nav side equals new nav side. Okay, once we put all of these buttons on, and again if we run that, you'll see the width of our container is right here. So what we want is our box, our gray box, our nav side, to spread from this point to the edge of our player and later our browser, right? So the way to achieve that is to subtract the width of our container from the width of our stage. This is how we get this little gap in here. And the initial X position of our nav side should be right here, and this is also the nav container width. So this is all the information that we need to position this one correctly. First of all, the X, so nav side dot X equals nav container dot width. Okay. Then, secondly, we need to specify the width of our nav side, and that's nav side dot width equals stage dot stage width minus nav container dot width, like so. Now we'll add it to the nav container also. So nav container as child and nav side, and let's check it out. You can see it's right up here. One more thing obviously we need to do is to push it to the bottom, and not to push it to the bottom and subtract the height of the whole container, because that'll also put the gray boxes at the bottom, which are meant for mouse over. Also in the visible area of our website, we want to push it down and then subtract it for the height of our white space over here, and that's 60 pixels. So if we go and check our nav item and check this shape over here, you'll see that the height is 60.10 actually, but 60 is precise enough. Okay, so now that we have all of that fixed, we need to position the nav container. Nav container dot y equals stage dot stage height. Okay, so this will push it down to the stage height, but this will actually push it out of the visible area because the registration point again is at the top left. But I'll take it back by 60, and this is what we get. And this is actually what we want. So this is as far as the initial position of our navigation. This is it, and we'll just need to drop the opacity of our nav side a bit so we get this. We get it a bit transparent. Anyway, so this is it for the initial positioning and creating of our navigation system. We can put all of that in a function and call it whatever we want, but since this is something that will happen every time we launch the page, and that's the only time it will happen, we can just leave it as is. So now that we have our navigation system created and the initial position set over here, we'll copy and paste that into our positioning actions. This will actually mean that our navigation container is constantly being positioned to the bottom of our player. So if you run it now, you should see it repositioning, and it works. And if we test it in the external player, this should work smoothly. Here you are. Okay, and the next thing to do is to fix the scale of our nav container. So this is the scale x equals, and we've done that before, so stage.stage width divided by the initial width of our website. So when we first run our player, this will be 980 divided by 980 is 1. So the scale of our nav container is 1. And since we've programmed it that initially it fits from the left to the right side of our browser, this is exactly what we want. As soon as we start scaling it up though, you can see that it starts following, right? And if we start scaling down, it's also following. We can see one problem in the dynamic text that we're having in the buttons, because it's not being positioned appropriately. And we'll fix that in just a second. But otherwise, the scaling function of our navigation is done. And it's as simple as that. So now, let's go into our nav item and fix the nav_name dynamic text's position. The first property we need to set of the nav name is the auto size. So auto size equals text field auto size and left. That means that it'll auto size accordingly to, you know, the number of characters, the length of the string that it has inside. And also, now that we have that done, because now it'll stretch to the width of our button name, we can reposition it x equals, and let's check out first the width of our movie clip, which is 224, and we need to position it according to the right edge. So the value of x at the right edge is 224, right? And we need to subtract the x of our nav name from that value by the nav name width. So 224 minus nav name dot width minus, and this would be the margin, let's say 15. And here we are. So we have our navigation pretty much worked out right now. You know, we'll work with the tweening and mouse over and the animating these buttons in and all that, but the hard part is done. So we have it on the stage, we have it correctly positioning, everything is where it should be. One more thing that we obviously don't want for the buttons is them to be selectable, and this is also an easy fix. So we can say nav name dot selectable equals false. Okay, so now we can't select it anymore. Okay, so now we're done with creating and positioning our navigation. Just to quickly recap, we have a for loop here. We space them with nav item dot width times I. We give each button a different name by changing the text property of the nav_name dynamic text box and giving it a nav array I value. We've stored all of those names in here. If we change one of these, let's say headlines or recent news or whatever, you see that the change actually happens when you export the movie. So this is an easy way of modifying your navigation. We add them to our nav container. The reason to have a nav container is so we can actually reposition all of the items together and also scale them all together. We don't have to work with each and every one of them separately. Here we create this side box that we have, so this gray semi-transparent area on the right, which can house buttons for sounds or whatever. The width and the position of that is also set with measuring the width of the stage, measuring the width of the container, and then using that property to fill in that gap on the right. This is the alpha property. This is where we put it inside of the nav container, so we add it as a child to our nav container. And this is the initial position, the Y position of our nav container, which we subtract 60, so the stage.stage height minus 60, to bring it up for the height of this white area over here. Okay, so this is what we've done for the navigation. The positioning over here, this is the same as in navigation actions, its initial position. So we're constantly positioning it to the bottom of our website, bringing it up by 60, because otherwise it would be outside of the visible area. And here we're scaling it from the left to the right side of our player. So we're dividing the width of our player with 980, which is its default width when we run the movie, which means that if we scale it up, the navigation should scale up, and if we scale it down, the navigation should scale down. We've used one more fix, and that's the, first of all, auto size property of our nav name dynamic text, and that's text field auto size dot left. So that means it auto sizes depending on the number of characters that it's holding, so the length of the word that's inside. Then we've used the selectable property of our nav name dynamic text and made it false, so we can't select it. And we've positioned it according to the width of our movie clip. So we know that it's 224 pixels wide. We want it to be positioned according to the right edge of our button, right? So just according to the right edge and to the left. And for that reason, we subtract the nav name width. So we subtract the width of our text from this point over here, and then some, which is actually the margin. So minus 15 at the end actually is this white space that we have over here, so it's not completely squished to this right edge. So with all that out of the way, we'll actually go to building our header.